Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video, I actually wanted to talk about thinking of being unique and different and talking about product differentiation in terms of a strategy that you can choose for your business. So if you don't know, I'm actually a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and this is a strategy that we often talk about within business school, right? That's what we would teach students to do a product differentiation strategy. And what you're trying to do is carve out your organization and making it different relative to the rivals that are available in the marketplace. So you're trying to make your particular offering different than what everybody else is offering. And there's a lot of positive benefits with this particular strategy. And things like you can have higher long run outcomes, for example, because you're different and nobody else is offering the thing that you're doing. And if that particular thing that you are offering is profitable, you can sort of sustain these profitability for a longer time. But what's often not talked about is the sort of negative things that happen and the disadvantages of product differentiation strategy. So I want to talk about, use my particular example and sort of the things that I have been going through and thinking about lately in terms of creating this whole reciprocity project. So if you don't know what it is I'm trying to build this sort of sharing economy proofreading platform where you can upload a document and then somebody else will edit that particular document and send it back into the system. And then if the editor does a good job, then they get credit for that particular thing. And eventually I want this particular thing to grow, and because I think it's pretty useful. It's sort of, I created it to solve my particular problem. However, this is a particular unusual thing to do in terms of a business strategy professor. And so another thing that actually is particularly unusual, if you don't know, I've been doing these YouTube videos to get out there and tell other people that this is an interesting thing, and I also want to be as helpful as I possibly can, because there was not a lot of resources in terms of getting people into thinking about what business strategy professors do, or how do you actually become a business strategy professor. So, there really wasn't a lot when I went through and sort of did this particular route, and I thought I'd be as helpful as I possibly can in terms of allowing other people to learn this particular experience and how do you actually navigate, becoming a researcher, going and getting your PhD and things like that. So what I've actually learned, and being probably I think the only business professor YouTuber that's out there, there's lots of kind of interesting things I've learned in terms of disadvantages of this product differentiation strategy. And this is real things that I do think about, and I'm not sort of complaining in any sort of way, but it is stuff that you actually have to think about. So the first one is product differentiation really can increase market exit, and the reason is that it's a really risky strategy. So for example, if I say something on YouTube that has that doesn't agree with people, then it could possibly lead to eventual termination or something like that of my particular job, because it is maybe somebody takes offense to the thing that I do. So it does increase your actual higher probability of failure of doing a particular project, or, becoming a certain, going in a particular route. So there is a higher chance of failure. Actually have a simulation that I get students to do, and it does increase, and it sort of plays this kind of stuff out, and it does increase failure pretty significantly if you do a product differentiation strategy. The other thing, and this is really related, so the second thing is that differentiation strategy, it really does not perform well in the short term. It increases your short-term chance of failure significantly, and the reason is that it is pretty resource intensive. It's a lot more resource intensive than following what other people are doing. And so we actually have a term within, the academic literature, and it's sort of describes what you're trying to do, and it's much more along the lines of what's called optimal distinctiveness. And this is where you're trying to be similar to everybody else, but also trying to make yourself different than everybody else, because you actually gain some advantages of being different, but you don't want to be so different that you are considered kind of a quack. And whenever you're doing a differentiation strategy, which is exactly what this is, putting out these particular YouTube videos, for example, as a business professor, nobody else is doing that. It could be considered risky by a lot of people. For example, I should probably be writing academic papers at this moment, but I also think that this could lead to academic papers and things like that. So, but for people that don't see that, this is kind of a really unique strategy, and it is very different. It's very, there is this problem that you might run into a higher chance of doing something that's too different. So a third thing that could come up in terms of a disadvantage of being unique or disadvantage of a product differentiation strategy, it's really, it's harder to get traction. It's harder to get sort of audience traction, right? So the reason is because, with the thing that you're doing is because you're not only with a particular product, if you're offering something that's different, you're not only, educating the customer and that or educating others that this particular thing is useful and it has an advantage in the marketplace, but you're actually trying to educate people about the particular thing that you are doing as well, and that it has a particular advantage, right? So you have to do kind of double education with something, and you're not only convincing people that this particular thing is good, but then you're having to educate people that this thing is, what it's about and whatnot. So that's the one thing. If you have something that's too unique, you actually have to invest a fair bit in education to tell people what about this particular thing and what you're doing. The other thing that you often get when you're doing something that's unique and different, it might increase maybe negative perceptions of audience from your audiences, and in terms of the feedback that you get, might actually might increase your chance of doing something that is going to make you a little bit more conformist, right? So you're trying to do something that's unique and different, and then you get some negative feedback from audience members, and it doesn't matter who it is or what you're doing in terms of the product differentiation strategy that you're doing. But because you're doing something that's risky, you might sort of think, maybe I shouldn't do this going forward, and then you revert to doing something that's a little bit more traditional. And this happens a lot within business. That somebody offers a really cool product, it doesn't quite fit with what people are doing and what's kind of the norm, and then businesses will revert to what everybody else is doing, and then pretty soon that product just is a really strange, weird product that doesn't quite sort of fit. It's not different and it's not unique, but it also doesn't really solve the market very well because it's doing what everybody else is doing, right? So you have to often think about that in terms of going forward, that the audience feedback that you get can, because people don't perceive it in the way that you perceive it or your company perceives it, then you're more likely to change it to sort of meet the demands or what other people are sort of thinking. And this kind of relates to the last thing, is the last particular topic, the fifth thing that I was going to talk to you about. It does increase your chance of questioning your own leadership and your own management that you might happen. So if you offer something that's unique and different, a lot of times you might have this particular inner dialogue that, this is not working. Why am I doing this? This is too difficult, and you have to constantly be fighting against that. So you might often hear about this in Silicon Valley of, if you don't get traction, you should pivot, right? But there's a fair bit of evidence that this pivoting is not necessarily a good thing to do unless you're really far throughout the process and nothing is really working. But for a couple of years, it's going to take traction. So, for example, with the reciprocity project, for example, it is getting traction in terms of the YouTube videos. It's growing, but it's a slow, steady growth, and that's totally fine. And in terms of the traction that you get from Google, for example, the Google search engine, it takes a long time to get these sort of what's called backlinks, and these are what other people are referring to your particular website before it actually will get traction. And that's going to take years and not months or weeks, right? So you have to be very cognizant of that, and then you don't want to switch, or you have to sort of fight this inner dialogue constantly about this thing is worthwhile, it actually is a viable thing, this is a really interesting thing, because what ends up happening, if you don't know, most human beings are highly social human beings, right? So for highly social human beings, what does that mean? That means that we like to do what everybody else is doing. We're pretty conformist with a lot of things that we're doing. And if we're not doing something that is sort of conformist, then we're sort of thinking about what are they thinking. It's sort of communicating a strange message that you are not sort of being human, right? And at the end of the day, because we are we like to sort of group together as sort of natural in terms of our abilities. There's lots of reasons why that is the case, right? That it's easier to communicate, and information gets passed through a lot quicker between people because we have similarities and things like that. But we like to be together, and if you're doing anything that's unique and different, you have this sort of dialogue in your mind. And and if you're in an organization, you have a group of people, for example, that you're doing something that's unique and different, you're going to have to fight that. Fight that dialogue. And there's lots of tricks that you could do. For example, there's this thing called the skunk works in organizations. You have to fight what other people are doing, and it's a tricky thing to do. It's actually called the innovators. There's a comparable thing that's close to this, and it's called the innovator's dilemma, where you have to sort of make this decision. It's by Clayton Christensen. Actually a really cool idea about it, and you have to make this decision as a person that's doing something that's unique, or organization that's doing something unique, whether to stay with a thing that is providing a fair bit of value for you, or switch to something else that doesn't provide a value, but maybe in the long run it is going to provide a value. And you have to make this sort of conscious effort and decision to do this, and most organizations can't do it. They find a really hard time to do that. So if you're doing something that's unique and different, if you're trying to be unique and you're trying to differentiate yourself, just know that you're going to have these particular issues. And you have to have these, you have to think about these particular disadvantages of being unique and different. You have to constantly be fighting those particular disadvantages and think about them before you actually pursue a product differentiation strategy. These are real things, these 5 things, in terms of the increase of market exit. That is highly likely. You increase your short-term risk of chance of failure. You have to convince your audience. You have to explain to your audience what you're doing, and you're going to question yourself a fair bit, a lot more than what you would if you're doing something that what everybody else is doing, because it's proven what everybody else is doing, right? The thing that you're doing is not proven. And so you have to be very confident with what you're doing and going forward. So that's what I want to talk about today. If you like this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, as well as do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. It's really wonderful of you. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next video. All right, take care. Bye.